respected members. In fact, yesterday there were some debates which were taking place in terms of whether the government should invest money on infrastructure as far as the Central Vista project is concerned. So I had lots and lots of points to record, but because they are quite descriptive and lengthy, I just thought I will make a video post will serve that purpose. Moreover, we are expecting this important question to appear in the civil services examination in 2021, and it might figure up as an essay question, very important from the point of infrastructure. So it will serve both the objectives. So before we discuss whether the investment in this project is correct or not, we need to take stock of the current situation. We just are out of COVID and we have learned lots and lots of lessons during the last 1 year. And most of us will know that even during this time, the infrastructure projects were going on in a full swing in the country. The targeted, one of the key result areas and one of the key performance indicators for the highway department is number of kilometers constructed per day. And except for a brief period of 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, the highway projects are going on in full swing, probably because of the nature of the project, because most of these projects are away from the city. And if you look at the number of people within a square unit area, it is very, very low. So which makes safe distance and all that much more possible. So those things were going on in a full swing. But one thing that we need to understand is various research studies have said that investment in the infrastructure provides 5 times the multiplier effect. There have been lots and lots of researchers. I will give those data in some other video post. But as far as this is concerned, this investment is concerned, many people feel that instead of putting this money on infrastructure, why shouldn't the government do it on improving the hospital infrastructure, etc., etc. We all know that COVID is a passing cloud. We need to be careful, but just for that, we cannot keep on increasing investment in the hospital infrastructure. And now with improvement in the infrastructure, what is also required is you need to increase the number of people working in it. Otherwise, any hospital is nothing but brick, steel and cement without the medical fraternity working. So therefore, we also need to increase the number of fraternity. Their education plays a very, very important. Very much like head of the family is managing the family. He has to take care of all the needs in the family, the requirements of the ladies. Running the house requires the various expenses in terms of kitchen expenses. Your college going kids have expenses, the daughter has expenses, but the head of the family has a limited income within which he needs to judiciously use across all these expenses. So in terms of infrastructure, the government cannot keep on putting money into the hospital infrastructure. They have to judiciously use it for other measures like social welfare. COVID injections are being given free of cost to people. Subsidies need to be given to farmers. Recently, there have been record purchase of wheat in Punjab, and I will be posting another video on that. The education facilities, everything has to go hand in hand. It's not one at the cost of another. The needs are unlimited, but the means to achieve those needs are very, very limited. And that's the challenge of the government. Of course, the opposition has a job of finding fault with everything the government does, but a responsible opposition need to understand that the job of the opposition party, any opposition party, is not to oppose everything that the government does. So from that perspective, we would like to share certain details with you, not just with reference to the Central Vista project, but in general. We are discussing the issue of investment in the infrastructure. Now, as far as COVID is concerned, we have already come out of it. Yes, there is a second wave that is affecting us, and there are signs of abating, and we can see good amount of progress in the coming weeks and months. Now, if you look at the bank deposits, there have been a double digit growth in the bank deposits compared to the last year, which means a lot of money is flowing into the banking system. But if you look at the non-food credit, that's a matter of serious concern. There is weak demand. The reason is weak demand. Unless people take loans from the banks, unless people take loans from the banks and then spend that money, the economy will not benefit. It's something like circular velocity of money. That is equally important, something that we studied in basic economics, okay, supply and demand. But if you look at the capacity utilization, it's less than 70% in most of the industries. The PMI, of course, the Purchase Managers Index is also giving some contrary data points, but overall the demand and consumption has come down. Therefore, it is necessary for the government to invest in sectors which have a higher multiplier. So typically, if you think about multiplier and accelerator, there's no sector other than construction and infrastructure which can provide that much of multiplier. Okay. If you look at the number of aims, talking about the medical infrastructure, we have grown more than 267% from 6 to more than 22. That's the way the infrastructure is going. Infrastructure in medical facilities is not just hospitals. It has to be accompanied by a relative increase in the medical professionals like your doctors, your technicians, your nurses, etc., etc. In the absence of which, if you keep on creating hospitals, it is going to be of no use, because any hospital infrastructure is just brick, steel and house, just like any house or a godown. It becomes a hospital when you have people working in that hospital, and that's exactly where this gains some prominence. Therefore, you need to invest in educational institutions, increase the number of students getting through that. If you look at the data from 1914 onwards, the number of medical colleges have grown 48%. I'm talking about medical schools, approximately from 381 to 565. The undergraduate seats have gone by 58%, which is from 54,000 to approximately 85,000 students. If you look at post-graduation seats, they've also increased from approximately 30,000 seats to 54,000 seats. So what does that mean to the economy as a whole? So these kind of improvements, which the economic improvements, of course, COVID plays a very important role. But COVID or no COVID, these are some of the things that the governments have always been doing in terms of increasing the infrastructure. Today, if we are able to confront COVID, if not 100%, at least 70-75%, that is because of excellent planning in the past. So we cannot discredit the government from these three things. In fact, if you look at some old facilities, I think most of us are aware that in the last October, it was the first wave of COVID when it was on the process of receding. The government had allocated funds for more than 165 plants to be delivered in 2021, beginning of 2021. It was allocated to all the state governments, but surprisingly, unfortunately, most of the state governments did not use those resources. So it's not a question of financial crunch. It is more a question of governance. It's a governance failure. I'm not talking about any specific state government, but we cannot put all the blame on the central government, because oxygen plant is also part of the infrastructure. In fact, against 165 oxygen plants for which fund was allocated by mid-April 2021, only 33 were installed. So where does the failure lie? We need to introspect. This is exactly where we are coming to. The resources are at the disposal of the state governments, and they have to be used judiciously. Okay, but there have been too much of governance failures, red tapeism, whom to give contracts, lobbies come into play, the politics comes into picture. So a lot has got to do with the state governments also. We're talking about infrastructure. Apart from that, coming back to the Central Vista project that we started with, the basic premise of the Central Vista project, that it is taking away all the resources, is a failed logic. And by the way, some of this data that I've given you, they are all the viewpoints shared by one of the planning member. All that data has been taken from Rajiv Kumar, a planning commission, ex-planning commission member. All those data he has provided. So in fact, the whole project of Central Vista started much before COVID started. Committees were appointed, they sat through it, they discussed it, they slept over it, they did due diligence, and then they came to a decision. One of the reason was huge rents going to private parties. Now, if anybody raises this question, who is paying the rent, who is getting the rent, answers are not there. Obviously, we're not going to do a PhD research in that particular area in terms of collecting all the data. But all said and done, it serves two important points. Infrastructure, how it creates those multiplier effects we have talked about. I will also give you a story of what happened during the Great Depression. During Great Depression in the year 1929, we are all aware of it, similar to what happened in 2007 subprime crisis. So one of the steps the government did to pull the country out of this crisis, I'm talking about United States, was the Hoover Dam project. They invested huge sums of money into that project. But keeping what in mind? Keeping this in mind, that there were lots and lots of controversies, that the money being spent on that project was far disproportionate to the benefit that accrues in the long run in terms of water, power generation, etc., etc. You have various academics raising questions. But one of the most important point was brought by John Maynard Keynes, who brought to this world this Keynesian economics. Right, they brought in this concept of deficit financing, your fiscal deficit, primary deficit, revenue deficit, etc., which are justified. We're talking about the same effects when we talk about multiplier effect. During that time, what happened was the money which was spent on constructing that dam, any expenditure is a zero-sum activity, because the expenditure from the government is going into the pocket of ordinary citizens, your plumbers, your electricians. These are the guys who are going to be benefit out of it. The contractors, the cement suppliers, the transporters, cement companies, steel companies, because it's a very big project. So this way, the money flows out of the government and it pump primes the economy. Pump priming is very similar to what we do at home. What we do is we had a house in Coimbatore where you had an overhead tank and the water needs to be pumped from the underground sump to the overhead tank. But sometimes the pump did not have the power to do that. So we used to pour water from the top. And that water is an investment. But when you put that investment, then the pump starts working. Very similar to that. It's called as by pump priming. People who have traveled in trains, we all know, if the fan doesn't rotate, you can just use the comb but do it. It goes. I have traveled in second class throughout my life, so I have a lot of experience. So the money which is spent in the infrastructure, it goes to the people and it comes back as taxes back to the government. And this is circular velocity of money. So from an academic point of view, Central Vista has got everything rolled into one, and it's going to be one of the greatest infrastructure projects of the government, which is going to increase the economy as a whole. And I will be coming up with videos on circular velocity of money, something we studied in college at an undergraduate level. But if you look at that circular velocity of money concept in the context of Central Vista, it provides beautiful insights. In fact, something we didn't even think of when we passed our undergraduate examination. But when you look at it, it's a beautiful case for intellectual gratification. I must also share with you that when I was writing my thesis for my PhD degree, the only objective is to get this thesis through the doctoral panel and then attend the viva and get that degree. That was the only objective. But in fact, let me also share with you that most of the learnings I acquired, in fact, was after getting that degree, when they went through things, because that becomes a hobby, that becomes your passion. So passionately, when you go through the subject, that is when you are able to put your full heart into that subject and you are able to connect the dots and then derive a meaningful picture. Okay, but before that, it's PhD. You will do what your guide tells you to do. You're governed by some strict rules in terms of what you've mentioned in the synopsis, etc., etc. I think, that's what the real intellectual gratification comes when you're passionate about that subject and when you really go through that subject for no material benefit, and that's what is typically happening now. My only request is people who are educated, people who are intellectuals, people from IITs and IIMs, they have to look at points from various different perspectives and bring new points, bring in economic concepts into it, and then debate on that basis. That will be too interesting, right? Thank you very much. Have a nice day. This is Dr. Sadasivam signing off till we meet again with another video. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.